Today I want to talk to you on the subject, what is a leader? It is my goal and it's my joy to be able to come to conferences just like this on the subject of leadership and help men and women go to a whole new level. And that's what I want to do with you. I want to help you go to a whole new level as far as your leadership development is. I'm kind of a motivational teacher. I'm not a motivational speaker. A motivational speaker kind of just motivates you, and when you're all done, you kind of say, wow, that felt good. But about 2 or 3 days later, you kind of think, now, I was feeling good, but why was I feeling good? But I'm a teacher. I'm going to hopefully be able to give you some principles that will, maybe in some senses, even be a little bit euphoric to you. But what I really want to do is give you principles that 5 years from now you're applying into your church, into your family, into your business. Principles that have tremendous life-changing potential for you. And so I want to start this day today with you by talking about what is a leader. We hear a lot about it. We hear a lot about leadership. But what's a leader? To give you a handle on what a leader is, let's take the word and let's break it down. The letter L, let's start there, okay? When I think of a leader and what one becomes or is, the first word I think of is the word leadership. Leaders lead. And that's a fact. Now, when I speak about the fact that leaders lead, immediately that we get all kind of thoughts in our minds about leadership. We say, okay, now leaders lead. Does that mean that if I'm the senior pastor of a church, I'm the leader of the church? Does that mean if I am the CEO of a business, I'm the leader of the church? Does this mean if I own the business? Or if this means I'm a Sunday school teacher, does this mean I'm the leader of the Sunday school class? Does this mean if I'm the dad or the husband, I'm the leader of the family? Not necessarily. We're going to talk in a moment about myths of leadership. I saw a cartoon recently, though, that I think kind of describes what a lot of people think of a leader. It was a picture of a guy who is he's in a 2-lane hilly road, kind of like what you would have here in Arkansas, and a lot of curves, and it's 2 lanes, and he's the front car going about 40 miles an hour, and he's got about 30 cars behind him who are just honking horns and desperate to get the guy's name is Murray out of the way. And his wife's kind of disgusted too, as he kind of smugly is driving his car with all these cars behind him, and she is saying to him, Murray, just because you're the lead car doesn't mean you're the leader. I know all kind of people that are in a position that would say they're a leader, but they've never learned how to lead. In fact, some of the most frustrated people I know of today are people that have leadership responsibilities, but nobody's ever walked in their life and said, okay, let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about how to lead. So let me give you, first of all, some myths about leadership. Number one, and I hear this all the time, people will come up to me and they'll say, John, leaders are born, not made. In fact, many times they don't even make the statement, leaders are born, not made. Many times they ask the question. In fact, they'll raise their hand and they'll say, John, let me ask you a question. Are leaders born? Now, think about this question for a moment. Would you just think about it? Somebody raised their hand and they'll say, John, are leaders born? Well, my answer is always the same. Of course they are. Think about the question. I've never met an unborn leader. I want to tell you something. Leaders are born and so are followers. That's not the question. What they're really asking when they ask our leaders born, what they're really asking is, are there some people that they've got it? I mean, they just kind of come out of mama's womb and they got it. They're kind of a born leader. And then are there other people that they're out there and they don't have it, and they're never going to have it, and they're just destined to be followers, and certain people are destined to be leaders, and there's this huge gap between leader and follower, and you are either on one side or the other. Now, that's a tremendous myth, because here's what I know. I know there are certain people who have leadership gifts. There are people that are born with some natural leadership kind of talents. I know that. But what really excites me, and the reason that I'm here with you today is I've taught leadership now for over 15 years, and what I know is I have developed a lot of people that are not real good leaders. They weren't natural leaders, and yet now today they are leading incredibly. They're leading large churches, they're leading wonderful businesses, they've become leaders in their community, and yet they weren't, quote, the born leaders. So the good news is, whether you're a, quote, born leader or not, I know that leadership can be developed. And our whole time together today and tomorrow will be on helping you develop your leadership. Now, there's another myth about leadership, and that is that leadership is a rare skill. In other words, people say, well, you know, they either think it's a rare skill or they think it's very mystical. It's something out there that they're not sure what is, but every once in a while somebody becomes one. Here's what I believe. I don't believe that leadership is a rare skill. I believe it's rarely taught. What I really believe about leadership is there's not many people that really sit down and teach leadership. And if you don't believe me, think about it for a moment. How much leadership, as far as your education, did you have when you went to college or when you went to seminary? How many leadership courses did you have? In fact, many people are going to lead people after they get out of college and finish their formal education, but they didn't have any leadership courses. I think it's a skill that's basically rarely taught. Now, you combine the fact that leadership is not taught a lot with the fact that leaders can be developed, and it's not the fact that you have to be born to be a leader. And a classic illustration of that is my friend Dan Reiland. When Dan Reiland, in 1982, when Dan Reiland came to Skyline, I mean, fresh out of seminary, top in his class. And what we did at Skyline is we would take our seminarians, and for 1 year they could be an intern at our church. Which basically meant we brought them from seminary to deprogram them. You understand? We basically brought them back and said, okay, we're going to work on you, and we're going to now teach you what really is true to life. And Dan, I'll never forget him. He was not a people person. In fact, one day I can still remember in amazement as there were about a half a dozen of us in the lobby, in the kind of the front area, the administrative area of our offices. And Dan Reiland walks through there with his briefcase. I'll never forget this. He walks by all of us. He just walks straight ahead, walks right by every one of us. And I'm hanging around with the people, and I watch this kid walk right by us. And I'm kind of amazed. I mean, he didn't say hi. He didn't say, how are you? He doesn't say it's a nice day. He just passes us. And I'm saying to myself, he just passed people. I'm not sure he knows what a people is. And so I followed him to his office. I'll never forget. I followed him to his office. He sat down, got on the side of the desk and opens up his briefcase. I mean, you're talking about a real melancholy here. You're talking about the kind of a guy that is so organized, if his briefcase fell out of his hand, opened up, and the books fell out, they would fall out in order. And I closed the door and I said, Dan, you just passed all of us. You passed us, people. You didn't say hi. You didn't say how you doing. He said, oh, I know it. He said, I've got to get to work. I said, you just passed your work. You see, Dan, we're in the people business. I'm in the people business. You're in the people business. I can promise you right now that in our whole walk of life, our ability to influence people, our ability to positively affect people, our ability to lead people is going to determine our ability as far as how far we go in life itself. Now, the good news with this story is Dan Reiland became a student of people. He poured his life into learning relationships. I mentored him, and he was with me, became my executive pastor at this church. And I'm here to tell you, he's with me today as vice president of Enjoy. And I promise you, this guy literally raised up hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. Every time somebody asks me, can a leader be developed? Are leaders born? Whenever I get into those kind of questions, I immediately point to Dan Reiland as a person who has become a powerful, effective leader who didn't have what you would call the leadership goods when he was packaged and put together. And that's why I'm here with you, because I know the same can happen in your life. But it's a myth that leaders are born, not made. It's a myth that leadership is a rare skill. Another one is the fact that leadership exists only at the top of the organization. I hear that often. They'll say, well, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be the boss. If you're not the boss, then certainly you're not the leader. That's not true at all. In fact, here's the way this works. Leadership is influence, not position. It's not your title. It's not the name plate that you have on your office door that determines whether you're a leader. In fact, in the next leadership lecture I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to spend the whole time on the subject, leadership is influence. Number 4, the fourth myth, that all leaders are charismatic. And I speak of charismatic in the fact that they have charisma with their personality. In other words, there are people who think that, well, just certain leaders have a charisma about them and they just attract and draw people. I wrote a book several years ago entitled Be a People Person. The second chapter of that book, Be a People Person, is worth the whole book because it's entitled What Draws People to Me. In that chapter, I talk about charisma, what really charisma is. You know, we don't understand charisma. Let me take a moment and kind of explain it to you. You see, when you talk about a person that has charisma, you're not talking about a certain type of gifted personality, a Pied Piper type of person. We're not talking about that. The best way I can define charisma and help you separate a person that has charisma from a person that doesn't have charisma is very simple. People that have charisma, when they walk into the room where you are, or where people would be, when they walk into a room with people, the person with charisma, their highest and top agenda is, how can I make the people in this room feel good about themselves? In other words, people with charisma have what I call other people-mindedness. They are focusing on the needs of other people. So therefore, when they walk into the room, because that's their agenda and they have what I call other people-mindedness, when they walk into that room, they're thinking about you, and so they're talking to you, and they're building you up, and they're asking questions about you, and they have personal interest in you. And so you know what happens? As they talk about you, you know what you say? You say, boy, I like him. Come on now, anybody home? That's exactly what charisma is. A person with charisma has the ability to put other people first and get on their agenda and go find out what their heart is and deal with the passions and the things that they like. A person that lacks charisma, I'm going to tell you exactly the people that, you know what I'm talking about, a person that lacks charisma. Isn't it true? There are some people that lack charisma. I mean, they're so bad. If you're on the elevator and it stops on a floor and a person gets on, they have so little charisma you don't even know who they are. I mean, you don't even see them. You know what I'm talking about. They affect nobody. They're there, but nobody's home. Now, let me tell you about that person. A person that lacks charisma, you can go to the bank on this. Instead of their agenda being the other person, their agenda is themselves. They go into a crowded room, and you know what they're thinking? They walk into that crowded room, and they sit down with people, and they're saying, boy, I hope I look okay. Hope they like my sweater. Wow. Hope they accept me. You see, they're inward focused. And when you are an inward focused person thinking of yourself instead of others, you will always lack charisma. Just as when you're outward focused thinking of others, you will always begin to a certain degree to develop charisma. But many times I'll hear people say, well, a leader has to have this charismatic personality. That's not what we're talking about at all. In fact, here's the way this works. Charisma gets you inside the door. Credibility will keep you there. And that's a fact. And what I have found is that many times we give too much credit to a charismatic personality and not near enough to a credible personality. Now, when you start your ministry in your church, when you begin your business, whatever you're going into, here's what I can tell you. Charisma will get you kind of started and it'll flare you out a little bit and you'll get a little bit of notice with it. But it's the character and the credibility that will keep you in the leadership position. There's one more myth, and that is the fact that leaders control by manipulation. A lot of people say, well, boy, if you're a leader, don't you manipulate people? And boy, don't you have to kind of watch motives? And of course you do. But let me give you the distinction between manipulation and motivation. Manipulation is when you move people for the leader's advantage. In other words, if I'm the leader of the pack and I start moving you for my advantage, then I am manipulating you. Now I am getting gain out of movement of you. Motivation is where you move people for everyone's advantage. And that is so important in a leader's life. A leader moves people. That's the very fact that they're leaders. Leadership means movement. Leadership means direction. And so we are always wanting to move people, but there's a difference between motivating them and manipulating them. Now, let's talk about making you as a leader, first of all. I have a passion for what I'm about to say. In fact, I have an unbelievable passion. So as I teach you this next principle, what I want you to understand is you gotta not only hear the principle, but you gotta see my heart. Here's what I want to say to you. The first thing I want to say to you in developing your own leadership is you have to understand the value of leadership. And I am on a mission for the next 2 minutes to help you understand the value of leadership in your life. If up to this point you do not understand it, it is my goal to help you understand it. Let's explain it this way. The leadership of your life is the lid on your life. Whatever your ability to lead right now, whatever that is the lid that you have on your life. Whether it's your family, whether it's your business, whether it's your church, whether it's a Sunday school class, whether it's your youth group, whether it's a small group setting, doesn't matter. Your leadership hand is the lid upon your organization and upon the size of the group that you have. Now that's very important. And the reason that is very important is the moment that I understand that leadership determines the size of my ministry or the size of my organization, whatever it is, then all of a sudden what happens is I begin to have a passion to learn how to lead. Here's the way this works. If, for example, let's put a number on this hand now. Let's say this hand is let's say it's a 4. From 1 to 10, we're kind of an average leader. Maybe even a hair below, but it's a 4. Okay, this hand is a 4. If this hand is a 4, my leadership is a 4, let me tell you something, my organization is a 3. Can I tell you what your organization is never going to be if your leadership's a 4? You're never going to have a 7 organization with a 4 leadership. Now, see, this is where Christians sometimes, this is where we get really kind of messed up because we pray, we're sincere, we say, oh, God, help me to build a great church. God, help bless my Sunday school. God, bless my business. And we ask God to do something, and God's saying, you know I'm going to help everything I can help, but help yourself. You've got to learn how to lead. Some of the most sincere, wonderful, precious, godly people I know, I'm talking about people that really love God, are frustrated because they've never understood that it's their leadership that determines the size of their organization. Now, if this leadership's a 4, watch this. If this leadership's a 4, then my organization or my department or whatever is a 3. Now, I can't maybe take you from a 4 to a 10. But here's what I know. In the lessons that we're going to do in these next couple of days, here's what I do know. I can take you from a 4 to maybe a 7. And you say, wow, you can take me from a 4 to a 7? Of course you can go from a 4 to 7. Now watch this. If you can go from a 4 to a 7, watch what happens. If my leadership goes from a 4 to a 7, my ministry goes from a 3 to a 6. I've just doubled my organization. All because I have learned how to lead people. I'm here to tell you the good news, and the good news is that the moment you develop your leadership, your organization begins to grow. Listen to me very carefully. Read my lips. Everything rises and falls on leadership. You say, John, excuse me, you don't mean everything. You mean most things. No, read my lips. Everything rises and falls on leadership. When an organization has a good leader, it grows, and when it has a bad leader, it doesn't grow. When Israel had a good king, it prospered, and when Israel had a bad king, it didn't prosper. I'm here to tell you, everything rises and falls on leadership. And the moment that you understand that, and the moment that you buy into that, and the moment that you begin to have a passion to develop your leadership, the moment you grow as a leader, your organization grows. That's why I'm here at this conference. You see, I don't need to go to your church. I don't need to go home to your business. All I need to do is grow you. See, I have a passion, that is to grow leaders. That's why we have hundreds of leaders in this room right now. I'm here to grow you, because if I can grow you, I'll grow your organization. I'm not worried about your organization. I don't have to come to where you are. I don't have to come where your ministry is. All I've got to do is grow you. If I can grow you, your organization will grow. Let me tell you this. Non-growing organizations are a result of non-growing leaders. If your church has been flat for a long time, it's because your leadership's flat. All your organization is a mirror of your ability to lead people. So the second thing I would share with you today on the making of you as a leader is that you need to make a commitment to learn how to lead. And the reason that you need to make a commitment to learn how to lead is that's going to affect what size of an organization you have. Now, here's what I find in this area of making a commitment of learning how to lead. Here's what I find often happens. We come to a conference like this, we watch a video, we sit down and we grab a notebook or read a book, and we say, okay, now I'm going to learn how to lead. And here's what I want you to understand. You have to understand the value of what I call process. Especially contrasting the value of process over against the value of an event. Events are good for decisions, but process is good for change. So what happens is, as you begin to listen to me teach leadership for these next couple of days, you're going to begin to make a decision to grow as a leader. That's the good news. What you're going to find is it's going to be the development of hour by hour, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year that makes you a leader. It doesn't happen in one moment package. We kind of have a fast food mindset when it comes to leadership. And we kind of want to go up to the drive-in window and order those leadership fries and burgers. You know what I'm saying? And get it put in a sack, and we kind of want to take off and say, okay, I got my leadership here in this sack. It's a process. It's a lifelong journey. Now, you say, what's going to keep me from being a leader? Only one thing. It's the same thing that keeps every organization from growing. It's so simple that we miss it. When we look at an organization that stops growing, we say, okay, well, what happened to that church? What happened to that business? What happened to that department over there? It's very simple. All organizations stop growing when the cost gets too high. It's so simple. Don't miss it. When does your church stop growing? When the cost is too high. I'm not talking about dollars. It could be dollars, by the way. But it doesn't have to be dollars. The cost would maybe be that for you to get to a whole new level, there's going to have to be a change of personnel. It could be that there's going to have to be a learning of leadership. Like we're talking here. It could be that you're going to have to remove some departments and add some departments, or you're going to have to change some times. Now, here's what I'm saying. It's always when the cost gets too high that the organization stops growing. And for many of you in this room, the organization has stopped growing because as a leader, you haven't continued to learn to grow. And so there's going to be a price to be paid. Now, we can either pay now and play later, or we can play now and pay later. See, there always will be a payment. The question is not, are you going to pay? The question is, when you're going to pay. You can either determine now to learn leadership and teach leadership to those around you and develop your organization the way that God would have it to go. Or you can say, well, no, I don't want to learn it. I don't want to pay the price. I don't want to dedicate my time. I don't want to put the money in to do this. And so therefore you don't learn as a leader. And someday, somewhere, one day you look back on your life and say, boy, I never reached my potential. So my challenge to you, number 3, is start leading. And leadership can be described on 4 levels. There's the leadership that interests people. That's the person who says, I know where I'm going. There's the leadership that impresses people. That's the person who says, I've been there. It's more impressive, isn't it? When a person not only says, I know where I'm going, but I've been there. And then there's the leadership that influences people. That's the person who takes others with him or her to that planned goal and destination. And finally, there's the leadership that impacts people. And that's the one where you not only have taken them with you, but they are now taking their friends with you, and now it's beginning to multiply, and that's going to be a lot of fun. When I think of a leader, when I see the word leadership, the first word I think of is that leaders lead. The letter E in the word leader. When I think of a leader, I think of an equipper. I think of a person who has the ability not only to grow themselves, but to grow other people also. And we're going to spend a lot of time in this conference learning how to equip people around us. But I can tell you, Harvey Firestone was right when he said, it is only as we develop others that we permanently succeed. I put a box there in your notes, the Equipper's Game Plan. And let me just take a second to kind of explain what happens. I think if you go down to the left lower side of that box where it says low, I'm just down here in the corner, this is where we all begin. And when we begin in our organization, when we begin in our life, we can go two ways. Some people only go one way, some people go no ways, but we can go two ways. We can go from low to high on that left side as we begin to develop self. We begin to develop ourselves, and when we get up to the left-hand corner, we can go to the right and we can begin to lead ourselves. We develop ourselves and we learn to lead ourselves. And that's a challenge for all of us. We also, if we want to, could choose, as we begin on the low side, to begin to go to the right, and we can say, not only am I going to develop myself, but I'm going to develop others, and not only am I going to lead myself, but I'm going to lead others. Now, you always start on the left side and go up. You always start with self-development. You always start with leading your own self. Can I tell you something? If you and I cannot lead ourselves, we cannot lead others. So it always starts with me. If I cannot lead John Maxwell, I cannot lead other people. It's amazing how many people are still trying to lead other people. They've never learned yet to go under self-discipline and lead themselves. So I start with myself, but then I begin to develop others. Now in that lower left-hand box, at best, all I do is survive. But as I go up onto the left-hand side, I begin to produce. And as I go down to the right-hand lower corner, I begin to reproduce as I develop others. And by the time I have led self and begin to lead others, then I begin to become a leader. And our goal is to get in that right top-hand corner, to go from the left bottom to the right top. Now, let me just do a quick acrostic on the word equip, because we'll do an entire lesson on this later. When I equip people, the letter E stands for the fact I evaluate them. I have to ask myself a very simple question: how well can they do? And I do it from a 1 to a 10. And then letter Q, I qualify them. After I evaluate them, I ask myself, okay, how well did they do? In other words, I've kind of put them to a test. If they did well and I sense that there is some leadership potential, the letter U begins to kick in, and that is I unite with them. How well can we do together? Okay, they did well there by themselves. What happened if the two of us came together? The letter I began to invest time with them. And then the letter P, I finally provide resources and experiences with them. We sit down and all of a sudden we begin to provide resources, and I began to take them to conferences, and I began to put tapes in their hand. I began to put books in their hands. When I evaluate them, I ask the question, how well can they do? And again, in your notes, there's from a 1 to a 10. You need to say, okay, I think they're a 3, or I think they're a 9. Then I qualify them. How well did they do? From a 1 to a 10. Then how well can we do together? Let's do something together, and let's, again, score ourselves. Do we do an 8? Do we do a 2? Then I invest time, or am I getting a return here? And then is it getting better? And if you're negative, the good news is you can fit the letter D in the word leader. Leaders are dreamers. You show me a leader, and I will show you a person that has a dream. I'll show you a person that has a vision. I'll show you a person that sees farther, sees clearer than the other people around them. In fact, in my book, Developing the Leader Within You, I talk about a whole chapter on vision casting. And in that book, I basically say this: the indispensable quality of a leader is that they have a vision. They have a dream. In fact, once in a while in conferences like this, I'll have somebody come up, a pastor, or they'll come up and they'll say, "John, could you give me a vision of my church? Could you give me a dream for my church?" I can't get, I mean, it's not like I can reach in my pocket and say, "Yeah, here's a dream for you. Hey, take this vision." You can't hand them out like that. In fact, if you don't have a dream, you don't have a vision for your organization, I promise you this, you're not a leader. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that's got a vision is a leader. I've seen people that had visions. They weren't a leader. They just had too much buttermilk and onions the night before they went to bed. I'm not saying everybody that ever had a vision is a leader, but I'm saying this: every leader I have ever known had a vision. So let's talk about what I call the 4 vision levels of people. There's some people that never see it. Isn't that true? How many of you know people like that? I mean, no matter how plain it is, they never see it. How many? Yeah, we all know they don't. They usually sit right on the front row, don't they, huh? I mean, you know what? You preach this message of vision and passion, just look at them and say, "Ain't nobody home." I call those people wanderers. They just kind of wander through life, and they wonder about life. And they're just kind of like the children of Israel. They just kind of go in circles all of their life. It's their spiritual gift. Wondering. Then there's another level. Some people see it, but never pursue it on their own. They're what I call a follower. They'll follow you. They would never do it on their own. They would never climb that mountain on their own. They're not going to rise up in the early morning and discipline themselves to go to the peak. But if you go, and especially if you go and kind of wait on them and hang around with them and encourage them and, give them some water to drink on the way up there, you know what I'm saying? They'll follow you. And then there's some people who see it and pursue it. They're what I call achievers. They're personal achievers. In other words, they don't need anyone else. They just get up in the morning, they're going to climb that mountain. They're going to take that vision. But then there are some people who see it, they pursue it, and they help others see it. And that's a leader. That's what leaders do. Leaders take people with them on the trip. So key. So key. I want to make sure we see this. I think we see the difference between a successful person and a leader by now. For example, I can be a successful person and map out my life and arrive at a predetermined destination. I could say, for example, okay, John, I want to go to that fern over there. And so I can work through life and discipline my life and pay a price. And one day I get over here and I say, I've arrived. Now, that's a successful person. I've gotten from point A to point B and I've done it. Now, there's a difference between a successful person and a leader. You see, a leader takes the trip, but a leader doesn't take the trip by himself or by herself. You see, the very fact that we are a leader means that not only do I take the trip to the fern, but I have the ability to coalesce and bring people around me and bring us all from point A to B and get us to where we need to become as a leader. Now, there are 2 valleys in every vision. And I never hear very many people talk about it, so let me talk about it to you for a couple of minutes. There are 2 valleys. Whenever you have a vision, you're going up to the peak. I promise you there are 2 valleys that you have to go through. Now, first of all, we sit on a plateau and we see the vision. It's seen in our eyes. And about the time we see the vision, we go into what I call the first valley. The first valley is what I call or label ownership. Is it not true that as a leader, many times, we see the vision. We get all excited about it. In fact, we've prayed about it. We've written it down on a legal pad. We're all excited. We see this vision. And we go out to our people to share the vision with them. And we go out to our business to share the vision with them. And as we share it again, there's nobody home. Or it's kind of like, boy, that's some pretty big goals you got there, Pastor. Man, those are, whoo. Hey, praying for you. Hey, God be with you till we meet again. Every one of you understand this. The first valley that you ever go through when you begin to cast a vision is the ownership, where the people begin to own the vision themselves. Now let's say you're successful in bringing them through that valley. The moment they begin to own it, you begin to become activistic in it. You begin to take action. And you're on a higher plateau now, because now you're beginning to work out that vision. And as you're working out that vision, boy, you're saying, hey, look at this. Hey, we're sweating together. We're working together. We're going up. In fact, look, if you'll notice in that little picture I've got diagram for you, when you start daily action, you're much higher than where the vision was seen. You're up on another plateau. And that's the way it goes, by the way. Whenever you climb a mountain, it's not like this. It's you climb a mountain, you dip and you go up a little bit. But if you go through the dip right, if you go through the ownership valley right, when you come out on the other side, you always come out a little bit higher plateau than you were before. Never worry about the valley. Always make it your commitment to go through it correctly, so that when you come out on the other side, you're plateaued higher on the other side. Now you're action and you're doing the vision. I promise you there's another valley yet. You're not through the valleys. If you think the first one was difficult, that is getting the people to own it and buy it for themselves, the second one is a much deeper, much more difficult valley to go through. Because after you begin to work it out, and after you begin to spend time rolling up your sleeves, getting into the arena of action, you come into this second valley. And the valley here is what I call the valley of cost or price. What happens is, as you begin to work out the vision, what I have found happens so often is you begin to understand what the price is going to be. And the people say, man, I didn't realize it was going to take this long. Wow, I had no idea that it was going to take this kind of effort or this much money, or we were going to have to make this many changes. Let me give you a personal example. When I went to San Diego to pastor Skyline Wesleyan Church in 1981, I hadn't been there over about a year. The church was growing very, very fast. And I realized I was going to have to relocate the campus. And so I began to share the vision, and we went through the first valley of ownership until the people said, yes, this is our vision. We want to relocate. We want to have land so we can build facilities to reach more people. And we went through that valley, and we began to work it out. But when we realized it was a $35 million project, it was kind of like, hello. How bad do we want this? Let's talk again. Let's talk, you know what I mean? Let's have another family discussion. You remember when you were a kid and your dad would say, we're going to have family time tonight, and you'd get the kids and the mother and dad around the table, and you kind of close the door. You couldn't have your friends there? And you're just going to talk about the real family stuff? Well, it's in this valley. You got to have it's a gut check. You got to say, okay, where are we, and what are we willing to pay? Remember, I told you all organizations stop when the price gets too high. You've never seen an organization plateau and stop that it wasn't a price issue. Many, many times it's not dollars again. But I had to help our people understand the value of the vision, and we had to go back and do a gut check. And I spent a period from 1980, about 88, to 1995 of trying to buy land that needed to be zoned. And literally, we spent 5, 6, 7 years raising dollars, millions of dollars, for land that we could not even guarantee the people we could build on. I've often said, when I die someday, the finest leadership I've ever done, I'll never get credit for. Because you see, when you're leading and everybody's marching, man, it's easy. Can I tell you, the toughest years in Moses' life was after they said no to Canaan? Can you imagine being a leader and just helping people wander through the wilderness saying, someday we're going to get to go over there again? And by the way, you older folks, you ain't going. See, I learned a long time ago in leadership, when the momentum is going with you and the tide is going with you, You don't have to be a great leader to be out front. You just need to have a surfboard. And isn't it fun to ride the board all the way in? But try riding a surfboard against the waves. You see, that's the difference between great leaders and just people in leadership positions. You say, you know, the morale is down in the church. In the business, the finances are down. That's when leadership is needed the most. What I have found is that's when leaders are needed. That's why you need a leader. You don't need a leader to ride the wave of momentum. You need a leader when the momentum's not with you. And that's what leaders do well. Leaders have the ability to cast the vision in such a compelling way, put themselves into the vision, and then bring people along with them. That they have the ability to take the mountain. The mountain's not easy, but they have the ability to take the mountain. It's the indispensable quality of every leader. I wish I had time to really help you understand vision the way I want to. How to develop a picture for it. I want to encourage you. Many of you have this book. Many of you have my book, Developing the Leader Within You. If you do not have it, get it here. Get the book and read the chapter on vision casting. It will help you understand how to place the vision in front of the people until they will pay the price and they'll go through the valley of what I call ownership. By the way, until a person owns a vision, it'll never be successful. And I watch leaders who are unwilling or afraid sometimes to put it out on the line and ask for commitment because they're afraid if they ask for commitment, they're afraid the people won't jump on. Well, if they don't jump on, you're not going to be able to ride the train out. Remember this, you never know what you have in your organization until you ask for commitment. You never know what you have in your organization until you find out what ownership is. Many times when I travel into cities to do conferences, I rent a car. I go to the airport, rent a car. Off I go to that conference. Can I tell you something about those cars that I rent? I have never in my life waxed a rental car. You don't wax rental cars. You try to put as little in them as possible because you know it's not yours. When the red light on the dashboard comes and says it needs oil, you say, boy, I got to get this back as soon as I can. Huh? You don't put money in something that is not yours. It's the same way with the vision. People never invest in the vision until you've taken them through the valley of ownership, until you've taken them through the valley of price. You've got to ask them, first of all, do you want to do this? And number two, are you willing to pay for it? And when you've answered those two questions, then at that point as a leader, you can begin to cast the vision. When I see a leader, the letter E is I think and I see the word excellence. Leaders excel, and the word excel means to go beyond average. That's what leaders do. Leaders excel. I love what Dale Carnegie said. It's in your notes. Don't be afraid to give your best to what seemingly are small jobs. Every time you conquer one, it makes you that much stronger. If you do little jobs well, the big ones tend to take care of themselves. Leaders excel. My daughter Elizabeth graduated last year from high school. It was my privilege to be able to speak at her graduation. And so I talked to the graduates about what I call the Rebecca principle. It's a great principle that every leader needs to understand and grab hold of. You know the story well. Abraham has sent his servant to get a bride for Isaac, and so he goes back to the homeland. And the servant is trying to discern who the right woman would be, and so he prays a prayer, and he goes down to where the women are drawing water in the evening, and Rebecca comes down, and you know the story. She sees this stranger, and she offers him some water. But then what she does is amazing, because she not only offers him water, but she says, I not only will give you water, but she says, I'll also draw water for your camels. Now, to give him water is one thing, but you talk about excelling or going beyond average or walking the second mile. When Rebekah said, I'll give water to your camels, that was a huge statement. The servant had 10 camels. An average camel after a day will consume 20 gallons of water. So when Rebekah said, I'll give your camels something to drink, she was saying, I will now spend the next couple of hours of my life going over here to this well with my jug that probably held no more than 5 gallons and go down to the bottom of the well and pulling out that 5-gallon water, and I'll come over here to this water trough and I'll do this. I'm going to make in the next 2 hours 40 trips. I mean, if each trip just took her 3 minutes, it took her 3 minutes to do that one time and go down, drop that jug down there, pull out that water, go back over that trough, drop it. If it just took her 3 minutes, it would take her 2 hours to water those camels. So when Rebekah said, I want you to know I'm not only going to give you something to drink, but I also give your camels something to drink. This was a huge statement. Rebekah now is going way beyond what would ever be thought of as accepted or way beyond average. And she did. Of course, we know the story. You see, Rebekah's mindset and philosophy is totally opposite of what we find in today's society. You see, today's philosophy is this: minimum effort for maximum expectation. We want to know how little can I do and how much will I receive. Now, Jesus addresses the Rebekah principle. He addresses this issue of going beyond average when he talked one time, and let me just listen to these words. Unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, unless it goes further, in other words, beyond the call of duty, unless it goes beyond what you are paid to do, forced to do, asked to do, unless your whole life, your spirit and your outlook exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, he said, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. You see, today's philosophy is minimum effort for maximum return, where Rebekah's principle was very simple but much different. Maximum effort for minimum expectation. Rebekah said, how much can I give to you without thinking of any kind of return for herself? You see, Rebekah teaches us 3 things. Number 1, we are not to live our lives as a legalist. What's that mean? We need to cut out the eye for an eye. You did this for me, I'll do this for you. Let's make it even distribution. Let's keep score. We got to cut this legalism out. Leaders are not legalists. Can I tell you something about leadership? Listen to me very carefully. A leader will always give to his or her people more than he or her will ever receive back. So if you're into this equal return, I'm promising you're in trouble. Don't ever lead people thinking that if you do that somehow, that you poured into their life on Monday and Tuesday they'll return an equal amount. I just did an interview with Leadership Magazine on an article that's coming out this coming fall on leadership. And one of the questions they asked me in the leadership interview was, have you poured your life into people and found out that the people you poured your life into didn't always come back and rise up to the highest level? I said, that's one of the greatest disappointments of any leader's life. I could spend the next hour talking to you about people I poured my life into and gave the best and cared for and took and did everything I could, put time, energy, money, everything into their life, and only find out that somewhere along the ride they decided they want to get off the train. Don't we all have stories like that? We're not to live our life as a legalist. As a leader, quit waiting for your people to provide adequate compensation, whatever that is. I want to talk to you today on the subject, leadership is influence. It's not title, it's not position, it's not where you are on a job chart. Here's the best way I could explain this. If you and I would leave this conference right now, and we would go somewhere in the Fayetteville area, and we would go to a preschool or walk up and look over to where some kids are playing outside, without talking to a teacher, without talking to any of the kids, in 5 minutes, just watching children, we could pick out who the leaders are. Isn't that true? It's very easy to pick out a leader because there's one kid going across the field and he's got a soccer ball under his arm and he got 5 kids chasing after him, and there's another kid that's organizing. You can tell who the leaders are because they influence other kids. Well, it's not only true with kids, it's true with adults also. The person in your organization right now that has the most influence is the leader of that organization. Now, this is where the problem is. So many of us have what I call leadership positions. For some of you, you're senior pastors. For some of you, you're departmental heads over certain sections in the church. For some of you, you're business owners. We have leadership positions. Where the conflict comes in is that when we have a leadership position but we're not a leader, or we haven't been trained to be a leader, we become very frustrated because there are things that we need to do but we can't pull off. In fact, I always jokingly say to pastors, if at any time in your leadership with your congregation, if at any time you have to stand up in front of your people and say to them, follow me, I'm the leader, you're not. No leader ever has to declare himself or herself. Never. Never one time in my life have I ever declared that I'm the leader of the pack. I haven't even thought about it. Never enters my mind. Never think, okay, I got to tell these people I'm the leader of this group. Because I promise you, the one with the most influence is the leader. And wherever there's the crowd, that's where the leader is. In fact, it is impossible to be a leader without influence. And so therefore, when a pastor comes up to me and says, my people won't follow me as a leader, what should I do? The first thing you ought to do is redefine leadership. You're not a leader. If they're not following you, you may be a good person, you may be godly, you're going to go to heaven, but you don't have a clue about leadership. Now, where I learned leadership as influence was in my first church in Hillham, and so I want to start this session off by telling you a story about when I went to my first church in southern Indiana. Now, first of all, you got to understand, I don't know what leadership is. I mean, I've graduated I'm number 2 in my college class. I'm going to my first church. I've never had a leadership class. I've never had a leadership lecture. I've never had anybody sit down and say, here's what you're supposed to do as a leader. Now, it's kind of interesting, is what I'm going to do. I'm going to supposedly lead a church the rest of my life, or lead an organization and be a pastor. Now, isn't it interesting? I'm going to lead people, and nobody ever thought to teach me leadership. Now, they did teach me the difference between the dichotomy and the trichotomy of the Spirit. Now, that is a burning issue on the heart of people that will greatly change lives. No wonder Christianity Today said 85% of what you and I ever learn in seminary we'll never use in our lifetime. I kind of think it would be nice if they would teach us something practical, helpful, life-changing. But then they'd have to get a whole new curriculum, and that's another story. We don't need to get into that. So here I go to my first church board meeting. I have no clue how to have a church board meeting. Just a handful of country folks. And I walk in, and I remember I looked at them, I thought, oh, man, what am I going to do tonight? And because I'm pastoral, I thought, well, at least I'll kind of start us off in a spiritual tone. So I said, well, let's pray, because, I know how to pray. So I asked God to help us. And when I got done, I looked at them, and I said, now, let me ask you a question. Do any of you have anything on your heart? I kind of thought I'd open it up like a prayer and praise service. And as soon as I asked that question, there was a guy in the room by the name of Claude. Now, Claude was a farmer. And he stood up, and he said, well, yeah, he said, there are a couple things we need to talk about tonight. And Claude took off. Now, what was really neat is, while Claude would talk to the people in the boardroom about things that needed to be done, there was a guy who sat right beside him by the name of Benny. This is the slickest thing I ever saw. Claude would say it, and Benny would second it. And everybody would say aye. And I just sat there in amazement that night. Finally, Claude was done, and he looked at me and said, well, preacher, he said, I think we're done tonight. He said, you can close in prayer. And I said, well, I think I will. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Now, when I got home, my wife, Margaret, who was really anxious about that night, because she knew how I was anxious about that night, was waiting up for me. And when I came, and she said, how did it go? And how did it go? And I said, oh, babe, I said, got this church figured out. I said, went great. I said, I only need 2 people. God and Claude. and then I said, if I only get one, I'm voting for Claude. Because Claude keeps showing up all the time. I mean, he's real consistent. Now, what I understood in that first board meeting was very simple. Claude was the influencer of the group. Now, Claude didn't know he was a leader. In fact, if you went up and said, Claude, are you a leader? He'd say, oh, absolutely not. I'm a farmer. I wouldn't press him. I'm not even sure he knew how to spell the word. But he are one. Well, he said, it's obvious to me. We need to paint that front door. Fix that thing. I said, I like that. I said, I like that. I said, Claude, would you mind next Tuesday night at the board meeting? Would you just bring that up and talk to the other people? Oh, he said, sure. He said, preacher, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. Well, I said, Claude, you know, right behind the platform, we got those 3 Sunday school rooms. One on the right has a, you know, we only could put about 10 people in it. I mean, real small rooms, but we got a Sunday school class, one on the right. We got a Sunday school class on the left, and they're both full. Now, I said, the one in the middle, it's that we don't even have a class in there. There's just some junk in there. I've got last year's manger scene from the nativity set, and, you know, we've got stuff in there. I said, what are we going to do? Well, he said, I think we ought to start another Sunday school class, put it in that middle room. I said, I like that too. I said, would you mind Tuesday night at the board meeting? Would you mind helping me out? Oh, he said, don't worry about it. Sure. He said, well, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. I said, Claude, have you been down in the basement of the church? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, there's a couple inches of water down there. Frogs are hopping around. And crawdads are crawling around. I said, what are we going to do? He said, that's ridiculous. He said, we can't have Sunday school class down there with it like that. He said, we need to clean that up. I said, well, I think so. I said, would you? Oh, he said, I'll take care of that. I'll take care of that. Next Tuesday night board meeting, I opened up in prayer. Looked out and said, does anybody have anything on their heart tonight? Claude stood up, got his list out, said, preacher, it's going to take a long while. I said, you can sit down. I said, I think I will. He looked at the board and he said, have any of you noticed the front door in our church? He said, personally, I'm embarrassed. He said, the paint is peeling and cracking. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, what do you think visitors think when they walk up that wall? He said, I make a motion. We get the old paint off and a brand new fresh coat of paint on there. He said before Sunday. Benny's sitting right beside him. Said, that's a great idea, Claude. He said, I second it. Everybody said aye. Claude said, I'll tell you something else. He said, here we've got these 3 rooms behind the platform. On the right's a Sunday school class, one on the left Sunday school class. They're both full. We can't grow anymore in Sunday school. He said, but we've got this middle room. And he said that we don't even have a class in it. We just got a bunch of junk in there and last year's manger scene. He said, let's clean it up. And he looked back at Maxine Wilson. She had an appliance store she owned in West Baden. And he looked at Maxine and said, Maxine, he said, I'd like you to be the teacher of that class. He said, I've heard you substitute before. He said, you do a real fine job. He said, especially, he said, when you have one of them there quarterlies, he said, you do a real good job. He said, I'll personally get you a quarterly. And he said, I want you to teach that Sunday school class. My wife, Esther, and I will be the first 2 in that classroom. He said, you teach the class, and we're going to get it started next Sunday. And I looked back at Maxine Wilson. She was sitting there, big old tears coursing down her cheeks. So when Brother Claus said, I'll do my best. If you think I can do it, I'll sure do my best for you and for Jesus. And Benny said, it's a good idea. I second. And everybody said, all right. Claude looked at the board. He said, let me ask you a question. Have any of you been down in the basement of our church? He said, there's a couple inches of water down there. He said, frogs are hopping around and crawdads are crawling around. He says, we can't have our kids down there for Sunday school with that kind of a condition. He said, we need to clean up the basement. He said, we need to do it Saturday morning. He said, here's what we're going to do. He looked at Ab Legenauer and said, Ab, can you bring your truck? Leon, you bring your truck. I'll bring mine. He said, let's all bring a couple people in the neighborhood. He said, let's start at 8 o'clock. By noon, he said, we'll have the basement all cleaned up. Benny said, that's a great idea. He said, I second it. And everybody said, aye. Claude looked at me and said, well, preacher, he said, I think we're done. You can close in prayer. I said, well, I think I will. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. I pastored that church for 3 years and 3 months. We grew from 3 to 300. Not one time in any board meeting in those 3 years, 3 months did I ever personally carry an agenda item to the meeting. Every month, about a week before the board meeting, I went down on the farm. Claude and I did the chores and talked about the church. He carried the ball all the way for me. Wasn't it Mark Twain who said, it's amazing what could happen in an organization if the leader doesn't care who gets the credit? Oh, by the way, when I got ready to leave that church, I had a fellow who followed me. I went to college with him. His name was Denny. And I sat down in Villager Inn at that restaurant with Denny, and I began to share with him about Claude and me and the relationship and what had happened. And I just kind of shared and suggested. Denny said, really, I don't need to tell you how to do anything, but he said, I would suggest you just kind of come alongside of Claude and work with him and give him the ideas and let him carry the ball. I'm telling you, the more I talked about Claude, the more angry Denny became. I mean, he's sitting up there in that booth. I can still see him. Now he's leaning intently over at me. And finally it's his time to talk. And he's pounding the table between us. And he's pointing at me. He's looking at me and saying, let me tell you something, John. He said, that may be the way you led this church. He may be the way you run the church. But he said, I want to tell you something. He said, when I come to this church, I'm going to be the leader of this church, not Claude. And I sat there in that booth in Villager Inn, and I kind of leaned back and I said to myself, Self, there is a stupid man. Can I tell you, when you got saved, it didn't make you smart. There's an awful lot of stupid Christians going to heaven. Are you all right out there? Do they love Jesus? Yep. They're going to heaven? Yep. Do they have a clue? Not a clue. There's Denny saying he's going to be the leader of the church. See, Denny doesn't understand anything about leadership. Denny doesn't understand you don't get to declare leadership. You don't get to say, I'm the leader. That's not your privilege. It's not your honor. And Denny did exactly what he said. He went into that church, declared he was the leader, didn't need Claude, didn't need the farm. That church took a nosedive. Nothing was getting through. In fact, I know for a fact, 8 months after Denny was there, one day Claude came up to him before the service, put his arm around him and said, I think this would be a good day for you to resign. The fat lady just sang. The party's over. Turn out the lights, baby. Now, by the way, Denny never has figured this thing out. His whole ministry has been going from church to church to church to places of ministry to places of ministry. I would imagine he's been in 15 places in 25 years. No matter where he goes, he hadn't figured this thing out yet. And he stays for a little while, and he can't handle it there, and he's got to go somewhere else. And it's always going to get better in the next place. Can I tell you something? It doesn't get better because you change locations. It gets better because you change mindsets. The only change you need to work on is not the change of location in your life. The change you and I need to work on is between our ears. And the moment that you and I begin to understand leadership and begin to come alongside and really figure this leadership thing out and understand that it's influence. A great story. I could tell you Claude stories all the day, by the way. In fact, I was telling this story in Illinois and about 600 pastors, and Claude's son, who's in the ministry, was there. And when I got done telling the story and everybody's cracking up, I'll never forget, he came up, hugged me, he gave me a big hug. He said, my dad still runs the church. Of course he does. Can you understand and accept the fact that there are some people that ran it before you got there, will run it while you are there, and will run it after you leave? and we'll run it after Jesus comes. Oh, that's just a thought. You see, leadership's influence. And the one with the most influence is the leader of the pack. Always has been, always will be. I'll never forget, one day I'm talking to Claude, and I said, Claude, you know, we ran out of room. I mean, we really ran out of room. We didn't have any room in the church. In fact, it got to the place where we were running 150, and the church only seated 85, and I didn't know anything about going to 2 services. I didn't know anything about that at that time, back in the late 60s, early 70s. And so what we did is, you could, if you were a member of the church, if you're a board member, you could come, but you couldn't sit down. You know, we'd let you come. You just had to stand. Because we needed, and then it got to a place we could only park 33 cars out front. You could, if you were a member of the church, you could come to church. You just couldn't park your car in the parking lot. You had to park it and walk. In fact, we had 2 questions on membership survey questionnaire. When you're getting ready to join the church, we'd ask them, 1, do you know Christ as Savior? And number 2, will you park your car somewhere else? and they had to answer yes to one of those questions. Anyway, we were running out of room, and I looked at Claude. I said, Claude, you know what? We need to relocate and build church. He said, you're right, preacher. He said, we need to. I said, Claude, do you think you can find some land? He said, of course I can. He said, do you want me to get some? I said, go get some land. That was Saturday morning, about 10, about 2:30 in the afternoon. He called me on the phone and said, well, I got some. He said, just went down the road about a quarter of a mile. You know, the Lions property up there on the left, up on that hill. He said, they got 6, 7 acres. They said they'd give us what we need, sell us what we needed. He said, we shook hands. So he said, we got our land. Man, I said, that's great, Claude. I said, who's going to build the church? Well, he said, I've always used the French Lick Lumberyard Company down there. He said, they do a good job, build every building I've ever had. He said, have you met the guy that owns the company? I said, well, no. He said, well, get in the truck. Let's go down and meet him. I got in the truck. We went down, got out of the truck. Claude introduced me to the guy that owned it. They talked a little small talk for a moment. And Claude said, well, you know, he said, we're growing down there. We're going to buy some land over there on the Lions property. He said, we need somebody to build the church. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, can you build this for us? And he got out a legal pad. Drew a church, put a steeple on top. Said, can you build this? Guy said, yep, think I can. Shook hands, had our builder. Oh, if life would have been so simple in San Diego. Our people are excited. The next Sunday we're going to break ground. I mean, they were thrilled. I mean, they were excited. My district superintendent called me. Middle of the week, he said, how's it going? I said, man, it's going great. In fact, we're going to break ground. They said, in fact, come on down. We'd love to have you. Come on down. We'll have you pray. I'd love to have you. Got real quiet on the other end. He said, that's why I'm calling. Now I could tell there was a problem. I said, uh-oh, what's the problem? Well, he said, I don't think you've gone through the proper procedure yet. So, well, what do you mean? He said, well, let's start at the basic. He said, what was the vote of the congregation? I said, they didn't vote. He said, they didn't vote. You're going to go build a building. You're going to buy land. They didn't vote. He said, who in the world told you could do this? I said, Claude said. Number 1, we are not to live our lives as a legalist. What's that mean? We need to cut out the eye for an eye. You did this for me, I'll do this for you. Let's make it even distribution. Let's keep score. We got to cut this legalism out. Leaders are not legalists. Can I tell you something about leadership? Listen to me very carefully. A leader will always give to his or her people more than he or her will ever receive back. So if you're into this equal return, I'm promising you're in trouble. Don't ever lead people thinking that if you do that somehow, that you poured into their life on Monday and Tuesday they'll return an equal amount. I just did an interview with Leadership Magazine on an article that's coming out this coming fall on leadership. And one of the questions they asked me in the leadership interview was, have you poured your life into people and found out that the people you poured your life into didn't always come back and rise up to the highest level? I said, that's one of the greatest disappointments of any leader's life. I mean, I could spend the next hour talking to you about people I poured my life into and you know, gave the best and cared for and took and did everything I could, put time, energy, money, everything into their life, and only find out that somewhere along the ride they decided they want to get off the train. Don't we all have stories like that? We're not to live our life as a legalist. As a leader, quit waiting for your people to provide adequate compensation, whatever that is. I can still remember my first church in Hillham, Indiana, little country, rural, conservative farming community. I can still remember sitting in the first board meeting with these people, and they didn't have, it's an old rundown building, and over 100 years old, roof sagged, walls bowed. I can't even picture for you how bad it was. And they looked at me and they were very frustrated because they didn't think they had a chance to get this young kid out of college. And they said, we can only give you $80 a week, and that isn't going to be able to take care of you and your wife. And then they said, well, you know what we'll do? I'll tell you what, we'll let you work on the side. You can be a bivocational part-time pastor. And I'll never forget, before I could ever say a word, my wife, who at that time was very quiet and very shy, she stood up. She said, no, you don't understand. She said, my husband's going to come to this church, and he's going to work this church full time. He's going to work 60, 70 hours a week. He's going to work this full time. Now, she said, I'm a teacher. I'll get a job. And she not only got a job as teaching, but she taught kindergarten a half a day every day, but she also worked at a jewelry store and cleaned houses on the weekends. She said, I'll do all that. She said, he's going to build a great church here. And we poured into that little community so much more than we ever asked out of it. Can I tell you something? As a pastor for years, I was always a little bit leery of the potential staff member who came in, and their first question is, what am I going to get out of this job? What's my salary going to be? What's the compensation? How long's my vacation going to be? Well, the good news for you, it's going to be forever because you're not working for me. Have a lifetime sabbatical. Leaders never calculate up the dividends and make a decision based on the return. Leaders take people up a mountain, up a hill. They may know it even cost them dearly, but leaders take somebody someplace where they need to be. The second thing that Rebecca teaches us is that we cannot walk the second mile until we've walked the first. Oh, I love it. She said, let me give you water to drink first. Now let me take care of your camels. She had it in order. Do the first things first, do the second things second. And I love what my friend Zig Ziglar said. Zig said one time, he said, it's wonderful traveling the second mile because there's a lot less traffic there. How true. Third thing Rebecca teaches us is this: extra blessings are a result of extra effort. Little did Rebecca know, little did Rebecca know that when she went the extra mile, that she was going to become the great grandmother of the Messiah. She didn't know that. And the leaders that I know that are successful, they never go into something looking at the return. They never say, well, I'm going to do this, and if I do this, I'll get this back. No, they do it because, listen, why not do it because it's right? There's a store called Nordstrom's out on the West Coast. It's coming east. They're incredible. They do 3 times the business of other stores in the same shopping malls with the same kind of merchandise. All because the Nordstrom's basic philosophy is the only difference between stores is the way they treat the customer. Just recently I was speaking for Promise Keepers in Boise, and I was going to leave that Saturday night after speaking there and go to Sacramento to speak at a large Presbyterian church on Sunday. And Margaret and I were leaving Monday morning to go to China for 3 weeks, and so Margaret was going to get me a couple pair of shoes. And so she went down to Nordstrom's while I was gone to get them. I got in a Sunday evening, I don't know, about 6:30. And loved the shoes, tried them on. They were both, I'd given her the wrong size, and they were both half size too small. She called Nordstrom's up, and she said I was down to get these shoes, got the wrong size. She said, my husband and I have to leave. Our flight leaves at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning for China. She says, is there any way, the store doesn't open until 10. She says, is there any way that we could do something about this before we leave? The lady down at Nordstrom said, oh, Mrs. Maxwell, it's no problem at all. She says, now, we don't officially open until 10, but she said, if you'd come by about 8:30, 8:45, if you'll come by, and she described which door to come to, she said, we'll have one of our people there, and we'll be waiting for you, and we'll unlock the door for you. And we'll let you in, and we'll call our shoe guy tonight, and we'll tell him to come in early because we want him to take care of you. And if you'll just meet us there about 8:45 in the morning, we'll be there. And so sure enough, Mark and I are down there the next morning, and nobody's there, obviously, except right there by that door. There's a lady. She unlocks the door. She said, you must be the Maxwells. We've been expecting you. Come on in. She starts walking us down toward the shoe area. We only get about halfway there. Here comes the shoe guy towards us, puts his hand on. Hey, you must be the Maxwells. Been waiting for you. I've got the shoes, I think, at the right size. Put us down, set us down. Tried them on. Literally in 5 minutes, I got the right shoes on. They box them all up for me. Thank me very much. Give me a handshake. They take us right back to the door, unlock the door, and they say, now, if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know. Have a great trip. Compare that to the average usher on Sunday morning. Just a thought. Leaders always go the second mile. Boy, it is so true. The letter R stands for relationships. Leaders love people. If you can't lead them, you can't and won't love them. And if you don't love them, you shouldn't lead them. Loving them and leading them got to go in the same category. Many, many years ago, I was in Cincinnati, Ohio, at a Standard Oil gas station, and I can still remember standing in the rain writing down why customers quit. It was on the door of the Standard Oil station, Cincinnati, Ohio. Why do customers quit? 1% die. Now, I want to start right off by saying, if people die, that's a valid reason for them quitting. I'm telling you. Businessman, if they die, don't ask them to come back. Pastors, let them alone. Although, wouldn't it be nice to get at least their tithe back? Just a thought, just a thought. 1% die, 3% move away, 5% other friendships, 9% competition, 14% product dissatisfaction. Watch this one, 68%. It's an attitude of indifference toward the customer that makes people quit. Your relationships with your people is so absolute key in leading people. Remember when you were in school, think about the teachers that had an impact upon your life. Think about the classes where you did well. Think about where you got your good grades. There was something common about the class that you liked, the class that you did well. You know what was common? And that is you had a good relationship with the teacher. I learned a long time ago, you learn from people you like. And I learned a long time ago, you follow people you love. And people won't charge hills and die for leaders that do not have a bondedness or a connection or a relationship. When I talk to you on the subject, leadership is influence. I will talk to you about a subject that I never hear anybody talk about, I never read about, but man, I'm telling you, it's so key in leadership, but that is the ability to connect with people. Have you ever seen the train? Have you ever gone down and just watched the train when it was connecting cars? And how they'll back up and they'll connect, and somebody along the track will make sure that the couplings are tied in there the right way, and then they pull away. You know what I know? Many, many leaders never connect with their people. They back up and bang the car. You got me? Mr. Engine, Mr. Leader, backs up, bangs the car, never couples, and then heads off. The good news is he's going the right way. The bad news is nobody's with him. And remember, my favorite leadership proverb: he that thinketh he leadeth, and hath no one following him, is only taking a walk. And I know all kind of people taking walks. What happened? Very simple. They never connected. Focus on the Family just last month put out a book of mine entitled Breakthrough Parenting. It's basically 10 breakthroughs that every parent needs with their child. And one of the breakthroughs that I talk about in this book is the ability to connect. The ability to bond with your child. Now, your child's always going to do what you want them to do. They're not going to always be what you want them to be. It's that connectedness or that bondedness that when they go out on the peripheral and go out on the edge, it's that bondedness that has a tendency to bring them back. It's that bondedness that helps us as parents to love them unconditionally. And leaders love their people. In fact, here's what happens if you don't have the right relationship with people, if you don't love them. It's the old, by the way, it's the old Charlie Brown cartoon that I saw one time that he was saying, you know, I love mankind, it's just people I can't stand. So easy for us to love mankind. It's those people. When we bond and when we connect with people, when we develop the right kind of relationship, here's what I have found. We were in Israel a few years ago, and we were in the Golan Heights area, and they were telling us about, of course, the war with Syria. And our guide was talking to us about Israeli generals. And he said, you know, the casualties in the Israeli army as far as generals are concerned are very, very high. In most armies, generals very seldom are killed. But he said in the Israeli army, they're killed off. And he said the reason why is the generals always lead the charge up the hill. They don't send their people. They lead them. And he said there's something inspirational about the fact that your leader is charging the hill with you. There's something inspirational about the bondedness of a leader and his or her people, that they've connected, and that there's a relationship that is deep there. And that relationship is the empowering aura of a congregation or a business that allows them to go to a new level. I close with this story. Enjoy's making a transition ourselves, and we're moving from San Diego to Atlanta. And the reason we're moving to Atlanta is we want to be more in the center of what I would consider the Christian community. 80% of the people in the United States I can get to 80% of the people in America from the Atlanta airport within 2 hours. And you know everybody goes to Atlanta as far as the airport's concerned. I mean, the saying is if you go to heaven or hell, you got to go to Atlanta first. Now, or Dallas. Now, when I shared with the Enjoy people of the move, most of them are Southern Californians. They're born in Southern California. I mean, that's all they've ever known is just wonderful Southern California. And when I stood in front of those 78 employees, I began to share with them the vision of going to Atlanta. And I tell you, I can't describe to you the feeling in the room, but the feeling of family, the feeling of one for all and all for one. And when we asked them just kind of the initial response, 90% of them said, we want to go to Atlanta. 90% of them have never even been to Atlanta. What is that? It's relationships. It's sitting together and loving and sharing and imparting and bonding and connecting. Until you and I both understand that the dream that is worth pursuing together. And if you and I are ever going to accomplish anything as a leader, it's not going to be what we can do, it's what we can do with our people. And we can only do it with our people when the relationship and the bondedness is there. Okay, leaders lead, leaders equip. Leaders have an attitude that is uncommon among people, an attitude of tenaciousness. Leaders dream. Leaders excel and go way beyond average, and leaders relate well with people. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would help us to be that kind of a person.